Hey guys, this is Arswi. I used to believe that the scariest thing about time wasn't how fast it moved, but how quietly it erased the promises we swore would last forever. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that their memory feels like a physical ache in your chest, this story is for you. I grew up in a place called St. Jude's Landing, a small sleepy coastal town where the summer always smelled like salt spray, burnt sugar from the funnel, cake stands, and damp, rotting pine from the old boardwalk. In the winter, the town died a quiet death wrapped in grey fog and icy gales, but between June and August it vibrated with a kind of desperate, electric life. That's where I met Elsie Vance. I was 10 years old, standing outside the boardwalk arcade in a sudden summer rainstorm, trying to shelter myself under the frayed canvas canopy. She was 11, wearing a bright yellow rubber raincoat that was 3 sizes too big for her, holding an entire box of blue raspberry saltwater taffy she'd accidentally dropped onto the wet wooden planks. Instead of crying, she just sat down on the sodden boards, picked up a dirty piece of candy, blew the sand off it, and popped it into her mouth. Then she looked up at me, blinked her pale green eyes, and asked if I wanted one. From that day on, we were inseparable. While other kids spent their summers chasing high scores in the arcade or riding the squeaking Ferris wheel, Elsie and I explored the underbelly of the boardwalk. Beneath the elevated wooden walkway lay a shadowy secret world of cool, damp sand, barnacle-encrusted wooden pylons, and lost treasures washed up by the Atlantic tide. It was our sanctuary. The sun would filter down through the gaps in the floorboards above, casting thin golden stripes across the wet sand, while the distant muffled thunder of tourists walking over our heads felt like a world away. As the years stretched on, our friendship deepened into something quiet and absolute. By the time we were 17, we didn't need to speak to understand what the other was thinking. We had developed our own rhythm, a silent language built over years of shared sunsets and cheap frozen lemonade. It was the summer before we left for college when we created our tradition. On August 14th, the last night before the seasonal crowds began to thin out and the air turned sharp, Elsie brought me down underneath the North Pier. In her hand, she held an old, tarnished brass compass case she'd bought at a thrift store, its glass face long gone. Inside it was a single silver 1942 Mercury dime. She explained the rules to me with absolute gravity. Every year on August 14th at midnight we would meet beneath the third pillar of the North Pier. Whoever held the Mercury dime had to surrender it to the other person along with a scrap of paper tucked inside the compass case, a secret note writing down the one truth we were too afraid to say out loud during the year. We would hide the compass inside a small weathered notch in the pilings, sealed away from the rising tide. That first year she gave me the dime, and her note read simply, "Don't forget me when the world gets big." I gave her my promise, sealed with a kiss that tasted like salt and cinnamon, right there as the tide lapped at our ankles. Then life happened, not with a dramatic argument or a bitter fallout, but with the slow, agonizing creep of reality. I moved 600 miles away to Chicago to pursue an architecture degree, while Elsie stayed behind in our hometown to care for her ailing grandmother and work at the local maritime museum. For the first 2 years, the tradition held strong. I'd take a long-distance bus back to St. Jude's Landing every August 14. We'd sit under the dark pier, the smell of damp wood around us, swap the brass compass and the silver dime, and read our hidden notes by the dim glow of my phone screen. But as college ended and my career took over, the world got bigger, just like she had feared. By my 24th year, my visits became brief. By 26, I missed my first August 14th because of a crucial project launch at my firm. I called her, stammering apologies, promising I'd make it up to her next month. Her voice over the phone was soft, devoid of anger. "It is okay," she had whispered. "The ocean isn't going anywhere. Work hard." Eventually the calls grew sparse. We went from daily texts to weekly check-ins, then to occasional holiday messages. We didn't stop loving each other, we just allowed the noise of our separate lives to drown out the quiet hum of what we once were. I assumed we had time. That was my greatest mistake. Time is a silent thief that never returns what it steals. Last summer on August 14th, I woke up in my apartment in Chicago with an overwhelming weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't a logical thought, it was a visceral, unexplainable tug in my gut, like a thread pulled tight across hundreds of miles. I looked at the calendar. It had been nearly 4 years since I had last stepped foot in St. Jude's Landing. 4 years since I had held that brass compass. Without thinking, I packed a small duffel bag, cancelled my meetings for the week, and got into my car. I drove through the night, watching the flat Midwestern highways give way to the rolling green hills and finally the salty mist-heavy air of the coast. I arrived at St. Jude's Landing just before midnight. The boardwalk was quiet, shrouded in a thick summer fog. The neon lights of the arcade flickered softly against the damp night air, casting red and blue halos through the mist. The smell of salt spray and old wood hit me instantly, bringing back a wave of nostalgia so intense it made my eyes sting. I walked down the wooden steps to the beach and ducked beneath the North Pier. The tide was low. The cool sand yielded under my boots as I navigated through the shadows toward the third pillar. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt like a teenager again, half expecting to see her standing there in her oversized yellow raincoat, holding a box of saltwater taffy. The space beneath the pier was empty. Only the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline filled the dark. I reached into the dark notch of the wooden pylon, my fingers searching the cold, damp wood. My heart sank, but then my fingertips brushed against cold metal. I pulled out the tarnished brass compass case. It was heavy, much heavier than it should have been. I stepped out into the moonlight, my hands trembling as I unlatched the brass lid. Inside there was no single scrap of paper. The case was crammed full of small, neatly folded slips of paper, 4 of them, and resting right on top was the silver 1942 Mercury dime. I unfolded the first note dated 3 years ago, August 14th. You didn't make it tonight, but I left the dime here for you anyway. I hope Chicago is treating you well. The second note dated 2 years ago, August 14th. I sat here until 2 a.m. The stars were bright tonight. I missed the way we used to talk about everything and nothing. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the third note, written in shaky, uncertain handwriting, dated just 1 year ago, August 14th. I have to tell you something, but I don't want to ruin your bright new life. The doctors found a tumor in my brain 3 months ago. It's moving fast. I didn't want you to see me like this. I wanted your memory of me to stay full of sunshine and laughter under this boardwalk. I'm sorry I couldn't wait any longer. And then a fourth note, written in a different handwriting altogether. Her sister's dated 6 months ago. If you ever come back for this box. Elsie passed away quietly on January 12th. She spent her final days asking about the sea and about you. She made me promise to leave her final secret here, where it belongs. Attached to the back of the last note was one final sentence in Elsie's faint, looping script. My secret was always the same. It was always you. I collapsed onto the wet sand beneath that old wooden pier, holding the tiny brass compass against my chest, and sobbed until the sun began to peek over the horizon. The waves crashed around me, relentless and unbothered by the quiet tragedy unfolding on the shore. She had come back every single year. While I was busy building a life I thought mattered, she was sitting alone in the dark, keeping our promise alive until her body physically wouldn't let her anymore. Guys, we always convince ourselves that tomorrow is guaranteed. We put off the phone calls, we skip the visits, we let the people who built our foundation slip into the background of our busy routines. But the ocean keeps moving, the clock keeps ticking, and one day the pier will be empty and the space where they stood will just be shadow and sea fog. If there is someone in your life right now who you haven't called in a while, someone who knew you before the world changed you, don't wait for August 14th. Call them today. Tell them you remember, because the hardest part of moving on isn't letting go of the past. It's realizing how much of it was waiting for you to come back. This is Arswi. Take care of yourselves.